Good evening, and thank you for coming. So as I was looking at this, I just thought, I hope everybody knows what EHV-1 is. It's equine herpes disease, and it can cause probably the two main problems that we'll see are respiratory problems, and it can also cause neurologic problems, and it can also cause abortion. So just a little background that I neglected to put on my slide there. So at an equine venue like this, when there is a diagnosis of EHV-1, one thing that will happen is that horse that was diagnosed with EHV-1 is going to be isolated. It's going to be moved out of the barn, out of the area that it is in, and it's going to be moved to a separate location. And this would be part of kind of an overall of a quarantine. And because EHV-1 is a reportable disease, you're going to have state and regulatory veterinarians, groups involved. So the horse with the diagnosis of EHV-1 is going to be moved to an isolated area, and also other horses with signs consistent of EHV-1 are probably also going to be moved or isolated. And the reason is because horses that have EHV-1 have higher amounts of virus that they're shedding in their nasal secretions. Also, that it's going to happen is there's going to be also at the same time some segregation happening. So horses that were maybe in the same barn as that horse that had been diagnosed with EHV-1 or had the clinical signs, they're probably also going to be moved to a different location. And all this is kind of happening over a couple days. Some different things are going to be happening. So then there's going to be some testing that's going to be involved. Once the testing results come back, you're going to have horses segregated more, meaning those horses that tested, that if they were tested, that tested negative will be moved away from the positive ones, and those ones that were positive are going to stay quarantined. Also, this means there's going to be no horses in or out, so horse movement is going to be restricted. The management of these cases is they're going to be monitored. Their temperatures especially are going to be monitored very closely, usually twice a day, and they're also going to be closely monitored for any other clinical signs, depression, nasal secretions, neurologic signs. And then also, even another part of restriction is going to be limit human interaction with these horses. You're not going to have just people willy-nilly going in and out of the barns. There's going to be some restriction of movement of people in addition to the movement of horses. One thing that will happen, especially like at a racetrack, is eventually they're going to, because at a racetrack people still want to be training their horses, and if their horse was quarantined, but it's not showing any clinical signs, but maybe it had been in the barn with the horse that was positive, and they still want to train horses, there's going to be times set where different groups of horses can go out to the track to train. And another group of horses, too, that you need to think about also are the outriders. Those horses are going to need to be monitored and possibly tested. And then things that are going to also be implemented are biosecurity measures. So biosecurity measures are steps that are taken to prevent the transmission of an infectious disease. And there's a lot of different things that happen. So this will really happen with those horses that have the disease or have clinical signs suggestive of the disease. And that can include wearing gloves, wearing gowns, wearing plastic boots to treat those horses. In addition, they'll have separate people to take care of those horses. You want to use proper hand hygiene, so after you've dealt with one horse, you want to wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. They'll have foot baths at the barns for people to walk in and out of with disinfectant in it. And each horse will have their own separate equipment, whether it be grooming equipment, equipment to muck the stalls. Some of the stuff the equipment that might be shared from horse to horse, such as lead ropes, those are going to be disinfected in between using them on different horses. And then also you need to have a proper disinfectant to be used. And then another important part of this too is detection. So how are we going to detect this? It's going to be proper testing. So it would be testing those horses that are showing clinical signs, or maybe even those horses that were stalled or in the same barn as the horse that was initially positive. And the reason why you would want to test those horses is because they could have had nose-to-nose contact with the positive horse, or the other thing is that the people, all the same people, were going from all the horses in the barn and taking care of them. Let's see. I guess one thing, and this is why I have this piece of paper, because I forgot to put this up on my slides, but I think an important thing that everybody's wondering now is, okay, well, we know all of this stuff that happens, but how long? How long does all this stuff in place? And oftentimes the segregation, isolation, quarantine, and everything, there's two different ways that it can be looked at. And remember, each scenario is different. Probably the way each regulatory body deals with it can be different. If you look on the AAP website, the AAP guidelines, they state, and these are just guidelines for people to follow. I mean, some states do things differently, but they suggest 21 days of good monitoring, and then if there are no evidence of any clinical disease, then a quarantine can be released. Our state here, the Kentucky Ag, historically, they've done it a little differently, and what they've done is they've used diagnostic testing in addition to the monitoring of signs. So, one thing that the Kentucky Ag group, they will talk to trainers, talk to owners, and ask them. So basically, is it more important is your time or your money? Because once again, testing costs money. So it's going to cost the client to test. But if a trainer or owner says, I want to go ahead and test, what they would typically do is test all the horses in the barn initially, and then wait 14 days and retest them. I think one key thing to remember also is a little bit different from just dealing with this at the track or at the equine venue is, what do you do with those horses that may have been at the track, not in the quarantine barn, but what should I do with those horses if they were coming to my farm? Do I test all of them? And I think one thing you need to remember with equine herpes virus is it is prevalent in the equine population. I mean, 5% of horses are probably shedding it. So if you're going to test, you need to remember, only test those horses that are showing clinical signs, or if there is a reason to test. A reason to test would be is a horse was in a barn with a positive horse. And I think that there's a lot of debate about that also. So I hope I was able to answer the question for you. Thanks.